Hello and welcome to another Thoughts per Episode Doctor Who edition. Today we are talking about the episode 73 Yards, written by Russell T Davies. There was a lot of intrigue and mystery surrounding this episode on the weeks up to its release. We had the shot of the TARDIS being kind of all grown over and abandoned in a trailer, which people were able to attribute to this episode, especially as obviously time went on and promo images were released. And you get the impression that, back in the day you would have these back in the day but traditionally you would have these mid-season episodes or two-parters, especially in the RTD era, which would kind of be you'd have the opener to the season, which would be very Doctor companion story relevance, and then you'd have some fun monster of the week stories, and then usually in the middle of a season you'd have this more relevant two-parter again, and then some more fun adventures, and then obviously the series finale. I feel like that's kind of what 73 Yards is, at least maybe not as traditionally as what I'm saying, but maybe in a softer kind of a way, because it focuses a lot on Ruby and just a little bit on the mystery surrounding her. And I think this is more likely that this episode is going to come up again in the future, and it's going to tie into the mystery surrounding her character in a pretty important way. That being said, I do think this episode had some flaws. I think it is very close, very, very close to being brilliant and a masterpiece. But I think some things just don't quite add up, unless maybe you think about them really hard and do a lot of mental gymnastics. And I would say that is not really indicative of a successful bit of narrative. And also, even then, if you think about them really hard, I still think a lot of it doesn't add up. But let's go through what works and what does not work with 73 Yards. Firstly, I do love the premise, this idea of this woman who follows you, always staying at the same distance. They came up with a word for it in the episode, but I've already forgotten it, of course. Was it circumdistance or something? I don't remember. Either way, this woman who you can't quite make out because of a distance that she's standing away from you, who's making these strange gestures, who always somehow manages to follow you, even if you're on a train, and you just happen to look out the window and it kind of resets where she is. I think it's very spooky, very eerie. I think more eerie than spooky, maybe. And then, of course, you've got the wonderful touch of other people are able to approach her. Other people can see her. There's a perception filter around her, or at least something akin to it. And if you do point her out to people and people do approach her and ask her any number of questions, she doesn't change what she's doing, but the people asking her the questions suddenly become horrified, and specifically they almost look disgusted with Ruby, and they look at her and they run away and they don't want anything to do with her ever again. Now that's a really fun mystery, but when it comes to the end of the episode and all is revealed, does it actually work out? Does it make sense? So of course it's revealed that the woman who's doing the weird gestures and stuff is basically Ruby's kind of death gasp, death rattle, kind of echoing backwards through time, which is a really fucking cool concept if you ask me. Although some people have pointed out that the actress who played the old woman and the actress who played old Ruby are actually different people, so there might be some more mystery there. I kind of think it's just it's probably not of importance, so we're not going to give it too much thought continuing this discussion, but if you want to make theories based off of that, go ahead. For now, I'm going to take this narrative at face value and not read too much into casting decisions. It could always be something along the lines of the actress that they got to play the older version of Ruby, they chose for her appearance because she looked the most like Ruby, she looked the most feasibly like Ruby, and then the actress, they chose a different one to play because they needed someone who was able to be more down to travel around the country for shooting or something. It could be something as innocent as that. I think it's very clear that the woman who Ruby is watching is supposed to be this death gasp ghost version of her. So I made a tweet about this that seemed to get some traction with people who saw it, where I basically said, I think the whole people running away and screaming thing is that when they approach this ghost, for want of a better term, and they talk to her, and they kind of perceive her, and they kind of interact with her, they kind of engage with her on a level which allows them to see her for what she is, which is this thing that should not be, this very kind of Lovecraftian horror, maybe not in imagery, but in premise. And on a fundamental level, it horrifies them. And on a mystical level, I guess, as well, it probably horrifies them. I did see someone else say that maybe it's also a thing where the reason that kind of weird lore, that weird happenstance is in place is because if the people didn't run away screaming, the loop would change and Ruby might not get to the point where she becomes the ghost that sends the people running away screaming. Before we get too far away from stuff like premise as well, I do just want to mention that the whole thing about like how it affects Ruby, that this event happening where the Doctor just disappears and she can never get back into the TARDIS and there's always this woman following her for the rest of her life, and how she adapts to that and how she comes to accept it and how she makes it work in her favor is really fucking good, and it's the kind of thing I would like to write. For those of you who don't know, I like to write short stories as kind of a hobby at this point in my life, although obviously I want to do more with that. And the kind of thing that I've noticed that I like to write is ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances and how they adapt to that kind of thing. And honestly, I've probably been influenced from older Russell T Davies written episodes of Doctor Who where he's done similar things. He's very good at that. Also, I wanted to mention that with the whole like this episode is spanning Ruby's whole life kind of a thing. It is kind of Moffat-y in that way, in terms of like you think of The Girl Who Waited and you think of some of the stories where episodes have taken place over a much greater length of time than you might expect, and alternative lives have been lived by, you know, in the episode of The Girl Who Waited, not just Amy Pond as a character herself, and all that kind of thing, right? With like Clara's multiple lives. It feels a bit Moffat-y, but also it gives me major Turn Left vibes. I think it's Turn Left, it's not Turn Right. I forget the name of that episode, but where Donna kind of experiences an alternate timeline and an alternate way her life could go without the Doctor. It's very similar, but I think it is a bit less dour. Turn Left honestly makes me quite depressed watching through it, but I think that's just all, you know, the country going to shit and all these horrible things happening is probably the effect of that. But this eerie effect of you're living your entire life and you know that something's a little bit off, a little bit wrong, it should be different, is kind of present here in a lesser degree. Now, the main thing I think is wrong with this episode is the initial premise of Ruby and, you know, becoming the old ghost that haunts her, and that whole time travel thing is great. Separately, the whole learning a little tidbit about something that's going to happen in the future and then having the foreknowledge to try and stop that from happening for the greater good of humanity is also great with the Mad Jack thing. Putting those two together in a story, I don't know if they work together. Like, firstly, we have that sequence where Ruby is looking for help and she finds that, I don't know if it's meant to be like a bread and breakfast or just a pub or whatever in Wales, and at first it seems like a horror sequence and there's lots of tension and there's lots of suspense where they're talking about the legend of Mad Jack, and then it just turns out to be the locals fucking with her. That's a pretty big subversion of expectation, because the rest of the episode takes a slightly different turn in terms of tone, and I also think that can be a little bit janky, but I did appreciate the overall effect of like it stops being a thing of like this is a really spooky scary story and becomes more of a thing of like, okay, but how does this work though? Like, what are the limits of this and testing that? But yeah, like I said, with the whole Mad Jack thing, so the fairy circle there is to bind Mad Jack, right? Mad Jack has been unbound when you like step over the ring and let him loose and start the whole sequence of events. There is one major gaping plot hole with that I've noticed. Firstly, there's no trigger for the events to start in a sequence that we see. Like, we don't know who set up the fairy ring, and maybe this is something that's going to be revealed later on in a season, but we don't know who set up the fairy ring, we don't know who they are and why they're trying to stop this Mad Jack politician, like, years in the future. But also, when Ruby time travels back as a ghost, there's also no trigger event for that version of the timeline to be different. Like, she doesn't do anything different as the ghost. I guess as she's dying, she's saying don't step, and she's trying to get that message across to Ruby to tell the Doctor not to step on the fairy ring. But here's the thing, if Ruby stops that sequence of events from happening, then Mad Jack isn't bound, he's unbound, because the fairy ring remains unbroken, and therefore the whole chain of events with Ruby doesn't happen, which means she doesn't stop the politician, which means Mad Jack can do whatever the hell he wants. So Yeah, maybe I'm confusing myself here, but I don't think I am. Let me know if what I just said makes sense. I did have someone reply to me though, because I put these notes out in a tweet for this episode because I was just too damn impatient, and someone replied to me. Actually, I'm going to get their handle just in case this is a unique theory. I haven't really read too much into reactions on this episode yet. Oh, it couldn't have been an easy Twitter handle, could it? At Sardine, spelt DEAN_Nedjdig, also known as Dean Marlowe, said, now that Ruby doesn't stop Mad Jack, the nuclear war will happen. Maestro mentions the nuclear war to the Doctor and Ruby in the Devil's Cord. The snow that Ruby causes is not snow, it's nuclear fallout. I like that theory, especially since, I mean, I think the Maestro thing might be a little bit different. Maybe it's supposed to evoke that imagery, but I think that might be a separate nuclear apocalypse. But I like the idea, because in the episode, Ruby says that she could never make it snow again. You know how in every episode there's a moment where she makes it snow? When she gets on the timeline where she stops the politician from causing a nuclear holocaust, there's no more snow happening. So that makes me wonder if the series finale is going to tie back into this episode. And I don't know if some future storyline around Ruby is going to tie back into this episode and be like, this is the life that she has to lead. Or maybe if they find a way around it. Either way, I like that there are finally consequences for the Doctor just spouting spoilers casually as he's talking about things and laughing it off. But yeah, just one last time, most of that theory is not from me. That is just something someone replied to me about, and I felt like boosting it. I'm not 100% sold on it, but I do like the idea. Before I forget as well, I would like to throw out a prediction. I absolutely think that when the whole Susan Twist character becomes thrust into like the limelight and is like the main topic, and they're thinking about all the times that they've seen her before, because in this episode Ruby did start to recognize her. I would love it if Ruby was recounting all the times she'd seen her, where she was like, yeah, I saw her in the 60s and I saw her on that battlefield, and I saw her when we were in Wales. And the Doctor's like, Wales? When did you see her? When we were in Wales? And Ruby's like, oh my god, and just like remembers her entire alternate life. That would be really cool. I think that's pretty much all I have to say about this episode. I think I've pretty much covered everything, not always in the sequence, the correct order, the sequence of events that actually happen within the episode, but hey, what's new there? I can't ever keep to that. As I've said before, I really enjoyed this episode. I would give it an 8 out of 10. I don't really do ratings, but just to give you some idea of where I land on this after having picked it apart a little bit. It was really enjoyable and thought-provoking, and the kind of story, like I already said, I would like to write. And actually, now that I think about it, I have written a similar story before that had way more plot holes than this one. It was about we had to write a gothic short story in A-level English, and I wrote a story, and we had to do it using like the tropes of gothic short stories. So I did it about a girl who got kidnapped by this lord of a castle who forced her to eat human flesh, and at the end of the story, the twist was that it was kind of like a time travel situation, where by the end of it, he forced her, he killed her and then forced the younger version of her to eat her. Yeah, I was edgy as a kid. 73 yards is far better. I'm thinking about the audience this video actually tends to reach, and I'm going, oh no, oh, I've just given away Human Harvest, the overly edgy, bad, gothic time-traveling cannibalism short story I wrote when I was a teenager. If people request it, maybe I'll put it up somewhere for you all to read. I think I still have it somewhere, but it's not great. And with that, I really am going to say thank you for watching. Hit subscribe if you want to hear more about my thoughts on Doctor Who. Remember to like this video if you did like it, and I will see you in whatever I make next.